To discuss the status of tariffs with key U.S. trading partners, we invite our panel of analysts, Mike Leon and Michael Busler. Mike Leon is an NTD News contributor and the host of the podcast, Can We Please Talk? And Michael Busler is a professor of finance at Stockton University, as well as a public policy analyst. Thank you both for joining us. Professor Busler, can you give us an overview of where the U.S. stands in its trade relationship with countries that have big trade surpluses with the U.S., that group that some White House officials call the Dirty 15?
Yeah, so the total annual trade deficit is about $900 billion and growing. Of that total, about 80% of it is from the 15 largest trading partners, China being the largest of them. So Trump tried on April 2nd, I believe, to say, look, we need to come up with an agreement. For too long. These trade deficits have been negative, and they're mostly negative because the other countries put very large tariffs and quotas and additional regulations on American companies trying to sell their products in those countries. So Trump said, look, I want to come up with a trade deal. I'm a free market economist. I would like to see no tariffs on any products by any country. But President Trump, I think he still is somewhat of a free market idea, but he believes that tariffs should be a revenue generator for the U.S. So in most cases, I think his end goal is a 10% tariff on goods coming into the U.S., and he wants other countries to reciprocate with that, with a 10% tariff for our products going into their markets, but then opening up their markets and not putting excessive tariffs. The U.S. has a lot of products that the rest of the world can use, especially food. The U.S. is very efficient at producing food, but we can't sell it in a lot of countries because they put tariffs and quotas and they say, look, we want to protect our farmers, so we have to do that. Well, when they do that, it keeps the American companies out of the markets, and Trump wants to try to fix that as soon as possible.
Professor Busler, thank you for that deep insight. Now, Mike Leon, why does this matter? I mean, Investopedia says that you could have certain sectors grow in jobs or lose jobs depending on trade deficits. So it's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but why are trade imbalances something that President Trump views as a problem that he wants to tackle?
I mean, it's a great question, Kevin. I wish I had the answer for that. This is what I will tell you. Let me piggyback off of what Mr. Busler just said there. Good to see you, Mike, by the way. It's always been about the negotiation tactic of this, right? Kevin, he wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. When he came into office in 2015, going into 2016, right? He said North American Free Trade Agreement was the worst trade deal of all time. And what came out of that was the USMCA, which had some of the same principles, but a little bit more refinement on what North America trading partners would do. And Michael Busler could explain that a little bit more. But he's always wanted to reframe these deals, right? Even if they're existing, even if you're trying to squeeze a little bit more out of it, he wants to always make a deal and be able to tout the deal, which is why he's been touting so much the UK deal, now this Indonesia deal, Vietnam especially. A couple of those countries are on the top 15. Indonesia is one of our top 20, 25 trading partners out there. So he's always wanted to reframe this deal. I think the biggest thing that I've heard from just speaking to people about the secondary and tertiary effects of tariffs, and I've mentioned it here, is that the instability causes businesses to now it hampers their projections, right? So maybe they tighten up the purse strings a little bit. They have to figure out ways to maybe import something from a different field. I have a coffee sponsor, for example, Kevin, on the show. They've been hit the most with these tariffs, right? You get a 50% tariff into Brazil, and coffee is one of Brazil's biggest exports to the U.S. That's going to impact an entire line of products and services. So that means they're going to have to pass that on to consumers. They're just going to naturally have to pass it on to consumers to make up that deficit, or the current stock that they have right now, they don't know when they can re-up, right? So it's the instability has caused a little bit more of the chaos. And I think I've maintained this position that the White House has just not messaged this properly. Yes, we're going to send out 200 letters. Sending out letters is not a deal. If I sent you a letter, Kevin, and I said Kevin Hogan agreed to it, you'd be like, no. Mike Leon just sent me a letter. That doesn't mean I've agreed to anything. So I think they've got to find a way to communicate this a little bit better. We're coming up against a deadline on August 1st. And I think for a lot of these international foreign leaders right now, they need to make sense of what this partnership looks like going forward or in perpetuity, because it's going to affect their markets and it's going to affect a lot of businesses here in the U.S. This episode of Can We Please Talk is presented by our friends over at Fresh Roasted Coffee. Delicious tasting coffee since 2009. They've been our proud sponsor. You see the promo code there. Look at this. They sent me this beautiful kit right here. Listen to that. Listen to that seal coming out, right? What's in it? Environmentally safe, compostable K-Pods. I love the dark Mexican blend. You can go to their website right now, take the quiz. That quiz is going to put you with a flavor profile. Listen to that sound of the coffee that you're going to be matched up with. Go to freshroastedcoffee.com. Click the link right now in our show notes. You can see it right there. Click that link. It's going to take you to the site. When you get to checkout, use our promo code, Can We Please Get 20? All one word, Can We Please Get 20, 20. You're going to get 20% off your first purchase. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com, our official sponsor of the Can We Please Talk podcast.
Professor Busler, if you want to continue on that, you can, or just tell us that the U.S. Trade Representative says the U.S. trade goods deficit, which Communist China, which we were talking about, is $295 billion. That was in 2024. So what does that mean for the American people?
So when you have a trade deficit, it means that we're buying more from the foreign countries than they're buying from us. When we buy from them, money flows out of the country. When they buy from us, money flows in. But we have a large deficit. $800 or $900 billion, that's wealth that's flowing out of the country. So what Trump is trying to do is to get that to be even, like a surplus, but at least get it to be even. And for decades, this really started after World War II and picked up in the 1960s, these large trade deficits. He'd like to correct that. China got to be a wealthy country mostly because of the trade deficits that we have. So he'd like to correct that as soon as possible. Now, Trump's view is there may be some short-term pain, but we're looking for a long-term gain. And Mike is absolutely correct. There are supply chains that are going to be disrupted. Trump says, I want to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. That's part of the reason for these tariffs, especially on goods that are vital to national security: steel, aluminum, copper, medical supplies. But there are some things we can't produce here. You put a high tariff on Brazil, as Michael pointed out, and coffee prices go up, we can't grow coffee. We don't have the right climate for it. That's why we buy the coffee from Colombia or Brazil. With Brazil, it's somewhat of a political issue as well as an economic issue. Trump believes that the last president wasn't treated very fairly. I think they're going after him. Trump's going to try to help that out with that a little bit. But the end goal of these tariffs is to have, Trump's view, somewhat of a revenue generator. These countries are selling into the wealthiest market in the world, and it's opportunity for all of those countries. They should pay somewhat of a tariff. And again, as I mentioned, on the other side, we want our businesses to be able to sell into their markets. So the reason these deals are so difficult is we can come up with kind of a basic deal, but then there are all the exemptions. So some countries say, well, we'll come up with a deal, but there's a certain product we make, we don't want any competition. We want to protect the industries in our country that are doing that. And Trump's saying, well, that's not the free trade concept or the trade with just minimal tariffs. So these deals are a little more complex to negotiate than Trump thought. Finally just said, look, if I can't negotiate, I'll send a letter and say, this is the deal and that's it. Unless you come back to me before August 1st, this is what's going to happen. I think in the long run, this will be very positive. In the short run, there's going to be a lot of bumps in the road going down there to try to get to this good deal. But in the end, we'll have foreign markets open to U.S. manufacturers. Some manufacturing will come back to the U.S. And you mentioned about foreign investment. I believe Trump has signed agreements that will bring $6 or $7 or $8 trillion worth of foreign investment into this country. The deal with Nippon Steel, who is extremely efficient at producing steel, the deal with U.S. Steel, who's very inefficient at producing steel, will end up helping the U.S. steel market. And that's the kind of agreements he's trying to make. Mike also brought up a point. Well, look, Trump's a deal maker. He's the art of the deal. And that's true. And that's why he views a lot of these deals he wants to make with countries as, look, let's make good deals that are good for the U.S. and puts the U.S. number one.
Understood, Professor Busler. Thank you. Now, Mike, can the U.S. resolve trade disputes with China? Can Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent make any progress in his planned meeting with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng?
Well, I mean, I think that's the hope. And, one thing that this administration, and again, this is not a political viewpoint at all with respect to R&D, right? Because you're going to have Democrats that are going to have a talking point about this administration wants to placate certain actors that are not in the best interest of the U.S. But if you just look at a different example, but if you just look at the war in Ukraine, right, the president has tried to negotiate with Russian officials, right? Marco Rubio went out to Saudi Arabia, met with Sergei Lavrov and all of those counterparts there. They've been trying to negotiate the diplomacy. Finally, it comes to a head, and it's like, you know what? Vladimir Putin is not keeping up his end of this bargain if we were really actually trying to come to the negotiating table. So what? We try to circumvent that now. And now we're obviously potentially selling weapons to NATO that will be distributed to Ukraine. So I think, can they negotiate something? I know the administration has been trying to negotiate something. But, back to what Michael Busler said about if you set the precedent first, right? Trump, and I don't necessarily agree with this strategy, but Trump's strategy is, I'm going to set it first, and then you meet me there, and then we'll negotiate from there. And I think a lot of world leaders, my biggest thing has been, and I've said this elsewhere, has been, you can't do that so much with allies, because what happens is like, this is a friendship, this is a relationship, right? This is, a back and forth and ebb and flow. And when you do that with allies, you could potentially damage that relationship. Well, this is an adversary, right? China is a global superpower. China is our number one competitor. And I think for the administration to approach it and say, look, we're going to set it like this. We saw the back and forth with 145%, 125% tariffs, and the back and forth. But they've always tried in the back end diplomacy and negotiating this. So I will say I'll give them the benefit of the doubt until we hear something from Chinese officials. And then again, we have to figure out whether or not we trust that information, Kevin. But I think for right now, the administration has always tried to be on the up and up with respect to negotiating with China, because they know that's the number one competitor. That's our number one, for all intent and purpose, trade partner. So this is the biggest fish in the biggest pond. And this is going to, what Michael Busler said, it's going to have this ripple effect across the U.S. Economy, which will have the short-term pains that he was mentioning before if we don't get something negotiated soon with them.
Really a fascinating conversation this morning with you both, Mike Leon and Michael Busler. We appreciate your insight.